Welcome to episode 52 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give a midseason update on UTSA Basketball. Let's get started. All right, so we're about 2/3 of the way through this season. So we thought it would be a good time to reflect on where we are now and what we hope to see through the rest of the season in men's and women's basketball. I think it's fair to say right now that neither team is having the season that they hope for. Currently, the women are 4-14 overall, 2-7 in Conference USA, tied for last place with UAB. The men are 7-14 overall, 1-9 in conference, and are in last place in Conference USA. So let's kind of start by talking about both of these teams overall, and then we can dive into men's and women's separately.
All right, well, first of all, let's start off with the fact that we decided this season to become basketball season ticket holders. So we've been to just about all the home games for both teams, and we've tried to keep up with both teams via ESPN Plus when they're on ESPN Plus.
Right, when available.
So we've been able to at least catch most of the games, and I think that has given us at least a little bit more insight and a good idea of what we're seeing, because it seems to jive, I think, with what the coaches at times say on their coaches show, which is always good to see, right? Like, hey, you're seeing the same things that the coaches see. Look, overall, let's talk first about where they're struggling, and it really comes down to consistency. You know, both teams just kind of struggle taking it to the basket. They settle too much for jump shots, for three-pointers, really a lot of contested shots, and we'll dive a little bit deeper on for each team in those areas, but that seems to be, it's weird that both teams struggle with that.
Right.
Defensively, both teams really struggle making stops. I mean, I think that kind of hinders them on offense as well. Like you end up seeing, most often both of us have looked at each other and said, hey, if they could just get a couple turnovers here,
right,
they could run the floor and get some easy baskets. Because that's all basketball's about, right? Getting those easy baskets and making sure that you're more efficient on the offensive end. But I think overall, what frustrates me at times with both teams, but I think you could make a case for a lot of teams, a lot of college basketball teams, I should say, is the fact that it lacks fundamentals at times. Like, you see bad footwork. You see, especially with the women, you see them travel a lot. Like they just all of a sudden either pick up their dribble, or they just lose track of their dribble and they just absentmindedly travel. That and setting screens. The screens have really irritated in the season because for both teams, if you're setting a screen, you're trying to essentially shed the defender for the ball handler and put him in a position to either, go one-on-one with a lesser defender or put the screener in a position where they're going to the basket and they get an easy shot because they're all by themselves. But the ball handlers aren't doing a very good job of setting up the screen. So our screeners end up either having to poke their hip out a little bit and get called for a foul, or they don't get set. I should say they get set and the ball handler goes 5 feet away from them. And you're like, all right, then what was the purpose of having, whoever come out and set a screen? Those are just tough fundamentals that shouldn't be. They're just easy things to do, yet we're making them so tough. It's mind-boggling, and both teams are doing it. That again, surprising. I mean, there's so many things you can work on in practice. We say the same thing in football, but I think those three main, or at least core things, are what's hampering the teams. You want to talk about any other insights you have?
Yeah, I mean, those are some of our struggles. I mean, the good point is that both teams are really still giving full effort to their coaches. At this point in the season, we've pretty much gone through the first round of conference play. So this year, the Conference USA teams are all going to play each other twice. So the women have one more, and then they'll start over one more game that they have to play to get through that first set, and then they'll start over. The men have played all of the teams and now are about to go into the second part. So, you've already gone through half of conference play to be at a point where you're in last place or tied for last place has got to be pretty frustrating and could be something that really gets, the team morale down. But you don't see that on the court. You still see them playing hard, giving effort, trying to work together as a team, being positive. So, you got to give them credit for that, because it's got to be hard at this point in the season to realize, where you're at and what an uphill battle you have for the second part of the conference play.
Well, going back to what you said, neither team feels like they're at where they're supposed to be at.
Right.
Even throw out the preseason polls, but yeah, I mean, I think both teams felt like they could at least pull off a few upsets, and maybe they still can in the second half. Mm-hmm. But certainly, all those things we talked about already that were issues, effort can definitely cover up some of those issues. But I think, just playing a little bit smarter, and I think that hopefully they've learned something from their opponents in this first go round. Obviously, you said the ladies have to one more game, but still, right. For this first go round, I think they're probably learned, about their opponents, but they also learned something about themselves, and hopefully they can turn some of that luck around. Let's dive into the men's team. Let's talk about some bright spots, specifically some players. In terms of the vets, I would say for, the men's team, we're really talking about, obviously, Jacob Germany, who's been around now for 4 seasons. We're also talking about Jafed Medor. Look, Medor, and I should say Medor, I didn't think I said that correctly, but I think Medor really has become the guy for UTSA. When you're looking at the team, he's clearly the guy that pops. And I think that he would have been quite successful had he been here when Javon Jackson and, Keaton Wallace were here. So I think he would have added a distributor that would have set up both of them for easy baskets, it would have been exciting. I think a more complete team, because he also plays really good defense on, really good defense on guards and opposing ball handlers. So there's a lot to like about Medor. He leads right now the team in scoring with 13.7 points, and he's got about 3.8 assists per game. Problem is, he's been out the last couple games with an injury, and we felt it on the court.
Right.
Jacob Germany has also been out for a few games before Medor went out. Germany's got 11.9 points per game. He's averaging 8 rebounds. The thing is, there's just some times where it feels he's so frustrating, because I feel like there's just a little bit more that he can do. But it never felt like he really created that one easy shot to make. Instead, it feels like at times he throws 4 head fakes, and then he goes up and he gets blocked, but it's because every single time he goes up and throws 4 head fakes. The thing is, aside from that, you can tell he's gotten steadier. Last season, I criticized him because I felt like he was bad, passing out of double teams. This season, I feel like he's improved quite a bit. We need him and Medor out on the court, because I think they make UTSA, let's say, a little bit more solid and consistent. It's certainly not where I think the men's team still wants to be, but you have to rely on 2 guys, and these are the 2 guys, the 2 big veterans you have. The other guy that's been out that, maybe was a bit more than, maybe his absence caused a little bit more issues before, was Isaiah Ankara. He was really excited at the basketball tip-off event, and he was talking about, improving his outside shot. He kind of struggled early on, but then he kind of really started getting going. And, I think we've missed his length, and we've missed some of his athleticism and shooting. And he just got back the game on this past Saturday against FIU. I think it's going to take him a couple more games to get his legs under him, but I think it's encouraging at the very least to have him the second half of the season, as long as he stays healthy, as long as the other guys stay healthy, and I'll just kind of knock on wood right now. But I think it'll be encouraging for all these guys, because we do have some good youngsters here that Henson has put together, specifically DJ Richards. It gets a little wild for me at times, and there's times where I've grabbed you and said, DJ's getting a little out of control. But he's our 3rd leading scorer, 11 points per game. And he's leading the team in 3-point shooting at 39.4%. He makes more shots from 3-point land than I think, at a better clip than I think Minnie did last season.
Right.
So it's really encouraging. I think, he's got some length. He's got some athleticism. It's certainly something to build on here. So somebody you can start getting excited about. Another guy is John Buggs. Right now he's going through a brutal stretch. This last week, his 3-game homestand, he was 8 for 39 from the field.
Yeah, it was tough.
Brutal. Now, as I say that, both of us have noticed that there are times when UTSA offense bogs down, everybody freaks out as the shot clock's going down, and somehow it always ends up in John's hands. And it feels like they're just ruining his shooting percentage by just like giving it to him with like 2 seconds left, and he's like, I guess I have to let it go.
Right.
And he's like jacking it up from like 4 to 5 feet behind the 3-point line, and it literally just kind of throwing it up there. So some of his shooting woes have happened because of that, because he's not really getting it in rhythm. But that's some things that we'll talk about in a little bit that the UTSA men can work on offense. Otherwise, I like what he brings on defense. I like some of his athleticism, and I think he's got a steady hand. He really doesn't turn the ball over very much. And that's something that's crucial because of just what we've seen in past seasons with the UTSA men's team, where like all of a sudden we just start turning it over, and it's just like turnover, and Buggs just does not seem to turn it over that much. Just like any player, he'll have his moments, but they're not as up and down as some of these other youngsters. Last guy I want to bring up is Josh Farmer. I think he's just an inconsistent player as it is. He just hasn't been able to find his niche here. But he's like he's like a human pogo stick. The guy, if you throw the ball up, he's going up to get it. And to me, over the last few games, I feel like he's really started kind of coming onto his own. It seemed at times early in the season that like Coach Henson was really getting on his case. Like
you could tell that he really frustrated Coach Henson, because you would see them, and at one game, like kind of arguing on the sideline.
Right. And I thought it was interesting, but and kind of talking to some people, it sounds like Josh thrives on that. I don't think you want to take it to that high of a level, but what I see from Josh is just that big time athleticism that you can find a way to plug, some of your flaws with.
Right.
And
let's also mention that his family comes to a lot of games, and they are hilarious. They really get into the game, and they're cheering, and they're having a great time. So it's kind of fun watching his family there.
I mean, they're definitely dancing to the music. They're really into that. But they really also kind of get frustrated at times with Josh, I think, because of like he's not getting himself into the game. I don't think it's that. I just think that Henson needs to find a way to get Josh kind of set him up for some easy baskets, because I think that'll get him started. So, in looking at the team overall, now that we've kind of gone one by one, any thoughts from you?
I mean, we've noticed that, and I know this is going to sound simplistic, but when we do a really good job of moving the ball around and getting into the paint, those are the times where we've either won the game or we've at least been very competitive. The challenges have been when we can't get in the paint. We tend to get frustrated, and that's when you see the ball being kind of passed around the perimeter and people taking these either 3-point shots or just trying to jack up a jumper, and it doesn't work. And as soon as you start to see that we're not driving towards the basket and sticking around the perimeter, that's usually, to me, when I can say, okay, this is the turning point. It's all going to be downhill from now, because it seems like that's the frustration point. And once we start doing that, we can't turn it around, and we can't get back into a rhythm.
And it's kind of curious that you say that, because, Coach Henson had talked about being an emotion offense. So it's weird that they get so stagnant, that they just get so, he even kind of said it, they just kind of stand around and watch the ball. That is a problem that I think has to be corrected, and it comes down to coaching. I mean, it really does. He's going to have to get these guys to keep moving around on the court, especially the wing players, because if you can get the wing players moving around like John Buggs and, DJ Richards, get some of these swing guys really moving, you're going to catch that defense, especially if you're working the ball around like you talked about. You're going to catch them really out of sorts, and you're going to get some good shots off. If not, you're going to at least stretch the defense, and then it'll be easier to kind of essentially set up a nice, easy alley-oop or even a shot for Jacob Germany and, Josh Farmer. So certainly I think interesting that they've struggled with that at times.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't like the fact that they have slowed down the game, and it frustrated you too, especially against Middle Tennessee and Rice.
Yeah, in both of those games, we were in a rhythm. We were, successful, had a lead, and then it seemed like as soon as we tried to slow the game down to manage the clock, all of a sudden we got out of rhythm. You saw us, again, passing around the perimeter, taking bad jump shots or jacking up three-pointers with 2 seconds left on the shot clock, and that's when we go into a shooting drought. And as soon as that happens, it allows the other team to all of a sudden get back in the game. Middle Tennessee, we were successful in being able to have that last-second shot by Bugs that, went in. We won the game, but Rice, we got to overtime, and it just kind of fell apart from there.
Yeah, Rice is definitely a better team, and they just took advantage of the fact, that we did slow it down. Mm-hmm. Even with Middle Tennessee, that could have been a loss too, because it took a last-second three-pointer from Bugs to win that game. But certainly, I really think that sometimes you kind of start overthinking what what your strategy is going to be down the stretch. And I think Henson certainly can be criticized for that because, to your point, once they got out of rhythm, they can't get back that rhythm because now you've kind of played into the opponent's hands and that kind of puts you in a bad position. So, the only other thing I really want to talk about with this is the fact that, this team struggled to really attack the press against FIU. FIU's full court press was not impressive at all. It didn't create turnovers and didn't really take the UTSA team out of its rhythm. What it did though was give UTSA an opportunity to take advantage, but they didn't do it. They just didn't attack the press. Mm-hmm. There was a couple of nice moments where they would break the press and get it to Germany down the court, and Germany begins driving, and right at the free throw line, he just lobs it up to Josh Farmer. Farmer goes and dunks it. I'm like, guys, that's what you guys should be doing the entire time. FIU will stop pressing if you do that. Mm-hmm. So, certainly, I think without Medor, I think that caused the problem. Mm-hmm. And, our defense certainly isn't creating those turnovers. Just like we talked about with the women. They're just not creating those turnovers and those easy baskets. So it makes it difficult for them to keep up and really put pressure on, our opponents. Look, in looking at the stats from last season to this season, it's clear that the trend is probably going to be a worse record this season than last season for the men. There has been some improvement in certain areas, but unfortunately, I don't think it's been so big that you're feeling this is going to be something that is sustainable or is enough to help Henson. And we'll talk about Henson here in a second. But for instance, last season, the team shot 29.4% from the three-point line. This season, it's 34.1%. Well, I think DJ Richards has a lot to say about that because he's shooting about 39% from the field, as I mentioned earlier, or from the three-point line, as I said. So, that certainly helps. That brings up the scoring a little bit, but it was only by a point. So again, small improvements, but just not enough. Same thing on defense. They're doing a better job of guarding that three-point line. Last season, they were giving up 35.9% on the three-point shooting line. Now it's 32.4%. Opponents are also doing better at the free throw line than they were last season. So that kind of adds to the deficit of, being outscored 75 points per game to 68.1. It's gotten a little worse. Mm-hmm. And I think what is weird for me is that the team I feel is a little bit better than it was last season. Certainly better shooters, better athletes, but I think all of the other teams got better too, and I don't think that helped UTSA because they didn't get to improve.
They didn't improve enough.
So that's a tough part. Any last thoughts on the team before we talk the elephant in the room?
No, I think we got to move on to to talking about Henson. He is in his second to last year of the contract. I think at this point it's not a matter of if he'll be let go, it's a matter of when. Certainly if you were to look at Twitter, there's some fans that think he should be let go now, like don't even wait until the end of the season. But, a couple of things that we have to think about when it comes to Henson. One, like we said before, the team is still playing really hard for him.
Yeah,
they're still dialed in. They're still focused. So, to me, he's not causing any detriment on the team. So, I hesitate to be in a situation where you let the coach go in the middle of the year unless it's just really creating a problem on the team. And you certainly don't see that. The players seem to be still trying to work hard for Henson. But at the end of the day, the question's going to come down to, I think, dollars and cents, just like it did last year, more so than coming down to, performance on the court. I don't think that anybody, including Dr. Campos, if we were to talk to her, would say that the performance on court is what we want. But we've got a year of buyout left. We've got Coach Traylor, asking for more money for his assistant coaches. We have facilities projects in the work for soccer. We need to get our facilities projects up and running for basketball and volleyball. So, if we see Coach Henson here next year, my guess is it's simply because we didn't want to pay the additional buyout money, because you're going to have to pay him out, and then you're going to have to pay a coach more money because we're in the AAC. So, don't know exactly what'll happen. Again, it'll either be the end of the season or next season, my guess. But, it is a little bit tough to know that it would take a miracle, I think, at this point for Henson to be retained based on performance, and I just don't think that's likely to happen.
Yeah, I agree with everything. It just, it's a shame, obviously. You hope that when you have a coach that they're going to be completely successful every single year. We all know that there's going to be some down years. I think that he did well with what he had when he had Javon Jackson and Keaton. And I don't think that there was any other way to really maximize them, except for trying to get maybe better players around them. But that's always been a challenge at UTSA, with the resources that have been allocated to, the basketball teams just in general. They've had success at times, but that success always lived within the Southland Conference. It has not lived in, the WAC or CUSA. There have been some great moments, but not that sustained success. And I know that it's going to sound crazy, but go back and look at the success from actually back to the TAAC era, which is back in the late 80s through Southland. There was some success. The UTSA teams were pretty good, and there was hope to get to the NCAA tournament every year, because even though it's a one-bid league, our teams were pretty competitive. But once we went up, it just seems like that sapped all of that that streak of success, or the sustained success that we had.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that fans have to realize, whether Henson's let go this year or next year, whoever walks in as the next coach is not going to be in a position to turn this around like Traylor turned the football team around.
That's a fair point.
If you look at Coach Aston, and we'll talk about the women's team here in a second and the rebuild that she's going through, this isn't a situation where we have the cupboard full of talent that can compete at the AAC level, because again, we're moving up another level. And that's not to say that the guys that we mentioned aren't talented. It's just, again, we're moving up conferences. There's some pretty tough teams that are in the American Conference. And, whoever comes in is going to have to recruit differently. They're going to have to come in and really push on getting the facilities that we need to attract that higher caliber student athlete, which is, the same thing that Coach Aston is struggling with right now. And there's only so much money to go around.
Yeah, certainly resources are just going to be pinched. And so, at some point, do you continue to funnel all the resources to football, or do you put the resources in the other sports? Again, the problem is football is your moneymaker. So
yeah, I mean, if you were to look at ticket sales, for example, right, large increase in season ticket holders in football, that will bring in an additional amount of revenue that will be substantial. If you were to sell out the combo, which, I mean, we're not anywhere close to selling out the combo, even if you doubled the amount of ticket sales
even
for
back
the combo.
in the Southland, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you struggle to look back and find a game where we, really had a huge crowd in the combo. It's not going to make an incremental difference. You can only seat 2,600 in the combo in the first place. So it's going to be hard for basketball to generate the amount of revenue that's needed to pay for the facilities, the coaches, the coaching staff, because it's not just going to be an upgrade in the head coach. You're going to need an upgrade in your assistant pool as well. So again, we know that we're going to get a new coach, whether it's next year or the year after that, but we're going to have to be patient in terms of the expectations we have for that new coach.
With that, you ready to turn to the women's team? Excuse me.
Absolutely.
All right. You want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned a second ago we're in year 2 of a rebuild. And, the interesting thing with the women's team, it's year 2 officially of the rebuild. I like to say it's kind of year 1.5 because Coach Aston really turned over quite a bit of the roster that she had the first year. You got to remember, she came in late. She didn't really have a whole lot of time to recruit that first class. And so she brought in, a lot of grad students, seniors, JUCO, that sort of thing. And so a lot of that roster that we had last year didn't have eligibility or didn't come back. So while she has 6 returners from last year's roster, there's really only 3 of them that had some significant playing time. And we have 5 freshmen on the team. So you're really looking at almost a rebuild within a rebuild, which, again, when you look at the results, they're not where you want to be, but it kind of gives you that ray of hope because there are so many freshmen. And again, you have to remember, this isn't like the same team that was here, last year. We still, turned quite a bit of the roster over.
I mean, overall, I think they're playing better. They're certainly more competitive than they were last season. Mm-hmm. We'll go into those stats in a little bit, but there's plenty of bright spots on this team. As with the men, we identified a couple of guys that we felt were the guys to watch. Mm-hmm. So with the women, let's do the same thing, and let's start with the veterans. It really starts, I think, with Jordan Jenkins. Bringing her over from USC, she's leading the team in scoring with 19.9 points per game. She still even leads Conference USA in scoring with about, I think, 19.1 points per game. She's leading UTSA in rebounding with 7.2 rebounds per game. Overall, I think she's been a good player. I think that she's certainly, when we're looking to figure out on the men's team who's going to be the one that steps up, we know on the women's team where the ball is going to go at crunch time. It's going to Jordan.
And the good and the bad is that the other team also knows that it's going to go to Jordan. Yeah. So there's a game plan specifically for Jordan for all of these teams now.
Another player to talk about is Alyssa Coleman. She was here last season. One of the things we noticed from her early on is the fact that she wore her emotions on her sleeve. Mm-hmm. She'd get frustrated. She'd make a mistake, or she got a foul call on her and she disagreed with, and then she kind of let that hang over into the next play and then the next play. Right. And then before you know it, she's committed 2 silly fouls and now she's got to be benched. I take you to now where I feel like she's become she's matured, I would say. Yeah. And so I don't see it as much now as she was earlier in the season when you could clearly tell, her facial expressions would say it all. Agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could tell 100% exactly what she was thinking early on in the season, and so did the defenders from the other team. They knew they were getting in her head, and so they were just kind of continuing, and she couldn't get out of her own way at times. And like you said, we'd get into foul trouble, and we just kind of snowball from there.
Yeah, but I think, as she's matured, she's also really started to solidify, I would say the interior defense of UTSA women's basketball. And I think that's been key for this team. And I think I look forward to the fact to see how she continues to grow by the end of the season. Coach Ashton kind of mentioned the fact that, she brought up Frank Harris and some of the struggles he went through with his knee injuries. And Alyssa had the same type of knee injuries as well. And, usually it takes about a season to kind of get back into the rhythm of things. But it feels like it's just taking her a little bit longer with that. That's not to, honestly criticize her. I mean, every athlete's going to go through all sorts of, troubles when it comes to, coming back from injury. But I think now she's starting to feel much more comfortable. She knows exactly where she needs to be on the court. And she's really done a great job of grabbing rebounds and really, again, blocking shots and just being that force interior for the women. So, look forward to her continuing to grow. But the one I got to talk to you here at the end, the veteran, is Kira White. I don't know what it is about her, but I really like the way she plays. She's had a lot of struggles in terms of shooting, but she's just a playmaker. She really does a good job of being the steady hand for this UTSA women's team. And it was really, I think, a low-key kind of addition. You got kind of the star in Jordan Jenkins, and then you got Kira White, and you're like, oh, okay, we got essentially 2 USC transfers, right? But the more I've seen Kira play, the more I think outside of the shooting, there's a lot to like about her defense and a lot to like about how she moves the ball on offense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, too, is her leadership on the court. There'll be times where, and I know you'll get into this in a second, some of our freshmen struggle and they get frustrated, or the other team gets in their head, and you see Kira pulling them together, trying to calm them down, get them focused. And so, that's one of the things that leadership component, it's an intangible. You're not going to see it show up on a stat line. But when you're there and you're in person and you're watching those interactions, you can see her influence on the team.
It's very Frank Harris-esque. I saw that a lot with Frank Harris in the COVID seasons. Some of the players would get, Rashad Wisdom against BYU, got kicked out of the game because he was, essentially got called for targeting. And I just remember Frank kind of pulling, Rashad aside. Rashad was like yelling at the field, to the refs. He pulled him aside and you could see him talking to him. Same thing like you just described with Kira. And I think that's going to be crucial because we have, I think, a nice set of freshmen here. These 5 freshmen that are, I'm not going to say that they're complete all-stars, but I think that they're going to be crucial components for the growth of the program and for the future here the next 2 or 3 seasons as we go into the AAC. Let's start with Sydney Love because I think it all begins and ends with Sydney here.
Yeah, she's the point guard.
She is. Tough to be a freshman point guard. She's had a lot of ups and downs with that. But what I like is her resolve. She just seems to continue to keep her head up, and with Kira's help and her advice, she seems to be improving and kind of finding her way within games. There are times where it seems like she doesn't really know what she needs to do. She gets some little talk from Kira, and before you know it, she comes back and hits a big shot. It is really crucial. I think Sydney Love, is right now, she's averaging 9 points per game. She averages 9 points per game in conference too. That's exactly what she's just averaging 9 points per game every single game. Usually there's a difference between, non-conference and conference. Right. Not her. She's that steady. She's also averaging, for the season, 2.2 assists per game. I think that'll go up a little bit more as she handles the ball more on offense and gets used to being the quarterback, essentially, of the team. One player that I like, especially one of the freshmen that I like watching play, is Sienna Gudadaro.
Yeah, she is definitely a difference maker when she comes off the bench. She tends to create a lot of havoc, and she's a really good three-point shooter. And she's been able to come in at those crucial moments and create that spark and then hit a couple of threes and really make a difference, in a quarter or a game.
She's pretty steady. And then, like you said, on defense, she just seems to poke those balls away she just finds the ball somehow and pokes those balls away, and that's how UTSA ends up taking possession. I dare say here that UTSA men's basketball team needs a Sienna, one guy that'll somehow always finds the ball and pokes it away and gets essentially creates those turnovers for the team. Sienna, I think, has had some sort of a up and down season in terms of playing time. So there's been some obviously growing pains with her, but I look forward to seeing her grow with Sydney, because I think at least right now that's the starting backcourt of the future for UTSA women's basketball. Another player that I like is Maya Linton. She's really, I think, because of the fact that Nisa Sam Grant isn't around to play center, Maya's gotten some extra minutes down low, and she's playing, a post, essentially. Maya's done a really good job of holding her own down there. Again, freshman, she tends to have some problems at times. Concentration can be lacking at times. But overall, I thought she's played well for a freshman, and I think she's gained minutes as she's become a little steadier. I think, again, here's another player that we'll be seeing down the line with Sienna, with Sydney. They're going to be forming the backbone of this UTSA women's team. The two guards off the bench are kind of fun to watch. Alexis Parker, just steady defensively, good shooter. But I really want to talk real quick about Madison Cockrell, because Madison is actually kind of the backup point guard. She's like that kid on the recreational basketball team that's just unfazed and just not intimidated by whatever is thrown at them. She's been pressured at times, and where Sydney at times kind of has indecision and has problems handling that pressure. Not Madison. Madison just dribbles past everybody. Now sometimes she gets out of control.
Right.
I mean, she is a freshman, but there's a lot to like about her game. Again, she's just doesn't seem phased, and she'll come in and also kind of hit a couple of big threes, and that to me is crucial. Look, we could potentially see a 3-guard lineup, and maybe Madison, Sydney, and Sienna in the future. Certainly gives Coach Aston plenty of pieces to work with here with these 5 freshmen. Let's talk real quick, though, about some of the major issues we've seen with this team.
I mean, one of the interesting things that I learned along the way is that the high school women's teams in most places or most states don't play with a shot clock. So these girls that are coming in as freshmen, one of the challenges they have is adjusting to having a shot clock. And because we're playing so many freshmen, you can see that at times, that clock management, they struggle with that. Yeah. And, again, it just didn't dawn on me because I haven't watched high school women's basketball in a very long time realize, I'm not up on it, sorry. To realize that was an issue until I heard Coach Aston talk about it in one of the interviews.
It is interesting, and like you said, it's noticeable at times, but I think that's no matter what, it's always going to be a growth. I don't think you can ever, and she even said as much, you can't change every single state to do that. But it's certainly something that, can be coached up, and I think that, honestly, Coach Aston has done a pretty good job, because I wouldn't say that it's as glaring an issue.
As it was at the beginning of the season, yeah.
Well, and even to your point, you even said, I wasn't aware of this issue.
Well, I noticed at the beginning of the season, if you're watching our games and the bands there, if it's the opposing team playing, they like to, pretend like the shot clock's running down quicker than it is. So let's say there's 5 seconds on the shot clock or 6 seconds, and you'll hear the band say, 3, 2, 1. But to try to kind of get in their heads, right? But I noticed at the beginning of the season, our girls on the bench were yelling towards the end of the shot clock, 5, 4, 3. They were yelling the correct, amount, but they were yelling it from the bench, and I kind of thought, well, that's sort of odd. They don't do that anymore, but now it makes sense why. It's like they were yelling to their teammates, like, hey!
Well, right, because, freshmen, again, you gotta, you have a freshman quarterback, right. A freshman quarterback on the football team is going to have problems, making sure that they're getting plays correct, that they're setting everything up. So, yeah, totally see that. Obviously you can go on and talk a little bit about, having better shooting and ball handling skills. Kind of talked about like Madison getting a little bit out of control. That's going to happen. That's just one of those lumps that you're going to take as you start freshmen and some of these young players. And I know Coach Aston knows that. I mean, obviously a smart lady. Don't need to really go into how smart she is, but these are some of the issues that she's seen as well and has just been transparent about it. She knows that this team needs to improve on ball handling skills, but also needs to play on that defense. You kind of talked about it a little bit with Alyssa in terms of fouling. But yeah, this team at times doesn't always make the stops and just makes some silly fouls. Like they just either get too aggressive or they just lose focus. And that's going to hurt you.
In the last game that the women's team played, I think both Jordan and Alyssa got into foul trouble in the first quarter, and so they had to sit most of the second quarter, which really made a big difference in terms of, our ability to move the basket, to make those plays on offense. And, we're doing a better job. I mentioned this happened again in the last game, but up to that point, you had seen us make improvements where, we were getting to the basket without getting into foul trouble. But it seems like it kind of crept back in, in that last game against FIU. And so hopefully, we'll have that kind of be the anomaly and kind of get back to where they were at, which was really making some significant strides.
Well, it's kind of like earlier we were talking about, just that inconsistency. Like, you want some consistency in your play, and I think that right now, still a learning process, and I think with all these new players, again, still part of that story. I just hope that they continue that defensive pressure and start learning that, because much like the men's team, if they can create some easy baskets off of that, it's going to go a long way in them making big strides on the court. Let's talk a little bit of a season's improvements, because at least with this team, I think you can see much more of what Coach Aston has done. Last season, they shot 33% from the field. This season, they're shooting 39.6% from the field. So you see a 6% jump there, which is big. You're also talking about a 5% jump when it comes to three-point shooting, because you've got last season 23.4, this season 28.4. That leads to scoring more points, right? Last season, it says 53.9 was the average. It never felt like it was that much. It felt like we really struggled to score points. This season, it's at 64.1. I mean, that's about almost a 10-point jump.
Right.
That is improvement. Obviously, we got some better players. We got some Jordan Jenkins, as we mentioned, who's getting some easier shots and being, a big-time scorer. Still, you could have just added her and then, put, a more inferior team around her, and we would probably still be in the same situation that we were last season. So, obviously, bring in some new pieces, and it's starting to begin to build towards something and feel better. Let's go real quick defensively. I think the big number that kind of sticks out here is that while I say that there's been a jump in allowing more points from 65.7 to 69.7, the deficit between how much UTSA has scored and, their opponents, they're not getting outscored as much. And you're seeing those deficits shrink, i.e. the competitive games. That kind of hope for the future that this team is starting to kind of show.
Said another way, the average loss from UTSA last year was by 12 points. This year, still losing, but we've closed that gap to 5 points.
Big improvements. Lots to look forward here with the women's team. But hey, what's up next for both teams?
Well, again, I mentioned they're about to go into their second half of conference play. The men are in Denton on Thursday playing North Texas, and then they'll be back at home in the Convocation Center on Saturday against Louisiana Tech. The women are at home on Thursday against North Texas, and then Saturday they're away at Louisiana Tech.
All right, well, now that we know what's up next for them in the short term, let's talk real quick long term. Let's talk about some questions that we have for the upcoming season, the 2023-2024 AAC season. If I were to ask you, what are the expectations going into the AAC for both teams? what at least would be your viewpoint, or at least your hope for that for both teams?
Yeah, I think, the men's is a little harder to answer just because, we don't know if that coaching change is going to happen next year or the year after that. Certainly, there are some very competitive teams that are playing in the American. So I think realistically, we need to look at being competitive at least among the Conference USA team, that are moving up. Being in the bottom of the conference is not where anyone wants to be. It's certainly, I'm sure, not on the goal of, Dr. Campos or anyone else in the athletic department. But I think we need to move from that bottom tier to somewhere in the middle. And, that's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I think if you do have that kind of quandary of, if you still have Henson or not, like if you still have Henson, I mean, I thought at one point that I would say, oh no, they're going to be two different expectations, but I think they're both the same,
Yeah.
Like you said, I think it's going to be moving to the middle.
Yeah, it's going to be, how do you get from the bottom third to that
middle third?
Yeah.
That's fair. I think it's going to take some big time recruiting and getting some more length and athleticism, speed, to add to what's currently on the roster. Mm-hmm. And let's just, see who ends up staying. Now let's flip the coin for the women.
Yeah, I think, again, there's much more opportunity for the women to make that jump next year than there is for the men, simply because, we've talked again about this core group of freshmen. They're now going to have another year under their belt. They're going to be, our core group of sophomores, and Jordan Jenkins, Alyssa Coleman still going to be here. So I think, having 2 years, playing together, I think they're going to have a much better opportunity to really make that jump. So for us to realistically talk about the women being in that middle tier and being much more competitive, I think that could very, very likely be a reality.
I agree. I mean, I think, I go back to what I said, in one of our Before We Go sections back in our November podcast. I said that Coach Aston is a great coach, but she's not a magician. Mm-hmm. And you've also mentioned within this podcast, you believe it's like year 1.5 with her, right?
Right.
I think, and this kind of leads into the next question we had, is next season a breakout under Coach Aston?
Yeah.
I think in terms of expectations and whether it would be a breakout, I think there's a lot more optimism towards mm-hmm. them at least being at minimum within that middle third, if not a little bit higher, because of all the base of what we have. Like you said, a talented freshman core group with some key veterans that, you add a couple more, young pieces. We've had a freshman that we've recruited that is honestly a talented player. And so to add that to this team, it's going to be key. And I think Coach Aston is just kind of, again, kind of doing what like Traylor did, just adding parts, mm-hmm. putting that plan together and, looking realistically that she will be able to climb a little bit higher and continue getting better. She took on quite the project coming here, and I just believe that she's still kind of, looking at her chops at getting some more players in here and really taking this UTSA women's basketball team to another level.
Yeah. There's
still hope for both teams, but I think right now a lot of the optimism should be with the women's team, and should really, I think, I know many people aren't going to be watching women's basketball, but I think you should, because there's a lot to like about what they're doing right now. Not to say that you shouldn't watch the men, just there's a lot of optimism with the ladies.
All right, before we go, let's talk about some changes that have happened on the football team recently.
Okay.
In terms of the roster, there's a few people who have gone into the transfer portal. Cam Peters has committed to Kilgore College. Xavier Player has committed to Texas Southern. Dre Spriggs has committed to UTEP. Chase Davis, Caden Holt, and Ty Edwards are still in the transfer portal, and I don't believe that they have committed to a new school yet. Not a lot of surprises in that list that's joined the transfer portal. I think once again, Traylor's been successful at keeping really his big name players from leaving the program, and has certainly kept the key players from moving on maybe to a P5 school. You know, in this world of NIL, I know that's been quite a bit of discussion. So he's been successful at keeping really his key pieces of his roster together.
Yeah, but I would say that we'll see how it goes in the future, because I think a lot of that has to do also with some of the players that are here. I mean, do you really want to, like, if you're a wide receiver, do you really want to transfer away from Frank Harris? You know, you got a guy that you've built a relationship with, and it's tough to say, hey, I'm going to go catch passes from somebody else. You know, because now you have to start a different type of relationship. So there's certainly good side, bad side to it, but you know, I think that Frank has a lot to do with that, not just Traylor.
Right.
So if we could find another Frank Harris type quarterback, I think maybe that's good for the for the future.
Well, and we've mentioned this before. We'll get into it more when we talk about our signing day coverage, but you know, we definitely will have a competition for QB2 next year between Owen McCown and Eddie Lee. So more to come on that later on. A couple of injury updates. Kavorian Barnes shared that he had an injury in the UTEP game. And when you think back to what happened in UTEP, that's the game when Brendan Brady was injured and had his season-ending injury. So a little bit scary to look back in hindsight and know that Kavorian had gotten injured in that game as well. He shared that he tore his labrum in his shoulder, recently had surgery, seems to be on the mend. And then Nick Booker-Brown had a surgery, appears to be a shoulder surgery, although we don't know exactly what the diagnosis was, but hopefully he is on the mend as well. In terms of coaching changes, Traylor announced that Sean Davis has been promoted to quarterback coach. It also announced an external hire in Jared Anderson, who was with TCU prior to Sonny Dykes joining last year. He's been hired as an assistant OL coach along with Kurt Traylor. Interesting thing is that there's been no announcement about a special teams coordinator. It appears that we're at our max for on-field position coaches, so you would imagine that we would hear about somebody getting promoted to special teams coordinator, or perhaps he's going to go with not filling the position. I've said it a million times, I don't like that strategy. Seen not having a special teams coordinator dedicated be a struggle for Iowa State, but who knows whether or not Traylor's going to go with that philosophy, or whether he's planning on promoting somebody in the next few weeks.
Your problem is you have two coaches at offensive line. You really needed to just hire one as a coach, the offensive line, and then one as a special teams coordinator. And I'm not saying that you need that one of those two coaches had to do that, but you know, that's your problem, is that you have two assistant coaches coaching one position group.
Right.
That limits you, and but that's, again, it's Coach Traylor's philosophy, how he wants to run his team. But to your point, I think you got to circle that and go, we've seen other schools do this and it hasn't turned out well. So in terms of no special teams coordinator.
Right.
So, you know,
again, and we're just guessing at this point. I mean, it could be that he makes some announcement as we get closer to signing day. I would anticipate we would hear something shortly, though, unless there is a risk that somebody else is going to leave. I mean, if you remember last year, it was pretty late in the spring when he ended up losing Rod Wright. So I guess there still is an opportunity that, you know, maybe he's holding off on this because he's not sure if someone else is going to leave or not.
Fair point.
In other news, Corey Mayfield accepted an invite to the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl. That game will be played on January 28th, and you can watch that on the NFL Network. Tariq Woolen will also be playing in the Pro Bowl game on February 5th. And, of course, Spencer Burford and the 49ers are still alive in the playoffs. They'll be playing the Eagles this weekend, and the winner goes to the Super Bowl. How amazing would it be if Spencer and a Roadrunner ends up in the Super Bowl?
And then we're already going to have our first Pro Bowler. Like, how amazing is that? Like,
I know.
It's just, again, lots of great things. Happy for both Tariq, happy for Spencer. We kind of listened to a couple of interviews from Spencer over the last couple of days. Just wanted to say out there for anybody that hasn't listened to Spencer talk, just he's a good speaker. Really impressed by how humble he is. And doesn't really forget about, exactly where he came from. I mean, for some people that's like a big thing. But I think it's a testament to him remembering where he came up from. He came from a smaller school, yet here he is. He's on the cusp of, being part of a team that's going to the Super Bowl. So
yeah, and when you think about what happened at the NFL draft with, one Spencer being in the 4th round, Tariq being in the 5th round. First of all, you really wouldn't expect either one of them to have seen very much playing time this season, but both of them have started. Both of them have been very successful, and both made it to the playoffs. Tariq, like you've mentioned, is going to be in the Pro Bowl. Spencer now is very close to being in a situation where he could be in a Super Bowl. It's just really great to see how much success they've had when, in hindsight, I don't think you would have expected such success so quickly from, 2 kids who came out of, again, a smaller school like UTSA in the 4th and 5th round.
Yeah, and, hopefully, for you, hopefully the Niners keep going because you've also got investment in your Iowa State quarterback, Mr. Irrelevant.
Yep.
Look, I get Brock Purdy maybe criticized for a lot of things, but I don't think we're ever going to see another last pick in the draft live up to the new expectations that Brock Purdy is setting.
Right, absolutely. All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for us. So thanks for joining us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm Atoves.
And I'm Toves.
We'll be back soon with our signing day coverage.
Birds up.